This film is a tribute to all the veterans of the 1st Battalion the Suffolk Regiment who fought in Normandy in 1944, and to the memory of one man, Major Ken Mayhew. We returned to Normandy in 2019 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of their deeds, to understand what they had achieved and reflect on their willpower and dogged perseverance. It was hard, intense fighting. The number of casualties the battalion sustained very similar to many battles in the First World War. We start with the assault in late June to take Chateau de La Londe, just a couple of miles north of Caen.
That is the wall facing this way of the grounds, and then just into that tree line, the walls go up following in that direction, and there are grounds all the way around the chateau. Over your back right is Caen, and the sea is down behind me. The importance of Caen was that if the German reserves, the armoured divisions that were all up towards Paris, the way into the beachhead, the beachhead to actually get at the Allies was through Caen. That was the major route. The routes here in Normandy are mainly north-south. The ones that go across, there's one which is close to the sea. There's another one to Paris. There aren't many others. So in order to get the armoured reserves forward, Caen was significant. The second reason that Caen is significant is that the Allies wanted airfields in France as soon as possible so that they had air power here for ground attack aircraft. The best place for airfields are just south of Caen. So the sooner you take Caen, the sooner you biff on south of Caen, the sooner you can get your aircraft over here. Until then, it's air support from UK, and we're right on the limit of ground attack aircraft at that time, the Spitfires and Typhoons, what have you. Germans realised this, the Allies realised this. So having not got Caen on the 6th of June, it then became one of Montgomery's top priorities. German defence of Caen was classic German defence, developed probably pre-First World War. You see it on the Somme in 1916, you see it in Hindenburg Line, and you see it here. There's a ridge line just north of Caen. That was their main defensive line, their Schwerpunkt, the key area that they held at all costs. Forward of that, you have a series of interlocking strong points, armour and infantry, that are there to break up the attacks, to identify the attacks where they're coming from, and to actually, from there, delay the enemy so that you have time to bring your reserves into the right part of the battlefield. The chateau was one of the key pieces of that forward defence. You had the chateau, you had La Bijoude behind it, you had Éperon just a little farther behind that, and a series of little hamlets all around here that were fortified after the 6th of June, forward of the main defence line, up north, south, just north of Caen, and that's the defence. So to break into it is actually quite difficult. If you try and attack the chateau, it's being supported by these other places. Machine guns, tanks, they've got mortar and artillery in support. This battle here is part of a thing called Opmitten. The main battle is Epsom, which was Montgomery, trying to get round to the west of Caen and push forward and envelop Caen. And he wanted his left flank secure, and that was done by 3rd Division in an operation called Mitten. It was a multi-phase operation, the first bit of which, to secure the start line, was a start line just the other side of the chateau, and the first bit of it was to take that, and then there was a series of other phases to get them up onto the high ground just north of Caen. So it was only meant to be a skirmishing battle at the front, at the start. I don't think, before the first time they attempted to take it, that anybody realised how strongly it was held and they thought that it would be a relatively easy battle to take with a battalion. They had a battalion attack from 8th Brigade, it failed. The second and third attempts also failed. But after the first attempt, they knew that sitting on this was at least a battalion position supported by a significant number of tanks and with interlocking fire from La Bijou d'Epron and other strong points behind. So we come on to the fourth attempt to take Chateau de La Londe on the 28th of June. 27th of June at 8:30 in the evening, the CO, Colonel Goff, gets his orders, and it's for an attack at 4:15 in the morning. And that attack is coming from behind me on the left, and so if you take that wall going in a line straight on through there, it's the far side of that attacking in the direction I'm pointing now, on the far side there, and they were coming from La Londe, which is another small chateau a little further on, about 500 yards from the chateau. On the right was 2 East Yorks, and they occupied the ground from a little into the chateau down here towards the road. They had no tanks in direct support. The brigade commander had decided to push his tanks round to the right and left to provide flank support. They did have, from the Middlesex Regiment, machine guns. The start line was a right angle running from this road. Behind that tree line there, if you look through, I think you could, can you see a chimney and then some trees beyond in another tree line? That was the start line. So, as I say, it's about 500 yards from that start line, across open field like this, into a walled, similar to that, and then into the grounds of the chateau. What happened was they had artillery support on the position. As the artillery rose, the infantry went in, but they took severe casualties getting onto the position. But they were onto the position in the chateau by 5:30. B Company had no anti-tank weapons and was attacked by German infantry supported by tanks. And after a strong fight, they had to surrender. The only 2 people that I'm aware of who didn't was the company commander, a chap called McCaffrey, and a platoon commander, Lieutenant Evans. They jumped into a thorn bush. The Germans didn't see them, and eventually later that evening they made their way back to the battalion. C Company managed to drive off the tanks that attacked them. They did have a Piat, and they took certainly 1 tank out, possibly more. D Company then moved forward, and from then on, from 5:30 in the morning until dusk, there was confused fighting in and around the chateau. And a number of counterattacks coming in from the Germans, from La Bijou and Epron. By last light, they had taken the position, and the Germans had withdrawn off the position, and it was in 1 Suffolk's hands. A quite extraordinary action of a battalion, unsupported by tanks, against armoured and infantry well dug in a very strong defensive position. B Company was decimated. There were 161 members of the Suffolk Regiment, all ranks killed or wounded. And if you remember when we were talking yesterday about that, very similar numbers to the battle later on. And 161 out of about 450, that is a serious amount of your rifle companies. For the Germans, it was a very important strong point as part of their defence of the northern side of Caen, but we had got it. The division then actually, none of the other phases of the attack took place. The division went firm here, and it wasn't until later, on the 9th of July, that there was a further assault from here to actually finally take Caen. And the battalion remained here until the 9th of July. So from the 6th of June when they landed to the 9th of July when they were eventually drawn out of the line on the final assault of Caen, 1 Suffolk were continually in the front line under German fire for the whole of that period, which is one hell of a long time. This area here was named afterwards as the Bloodiest Square Mile in Normandy. We should be enormously proud of what they achieved.
Towards the end of July, having finally captured Caen, and with the American capture of Coutances, the Allies were ready to start the breakout from the Normandy bridgehead. They advanced towards Falaise. The 3rd Division, with 1 Suffolk on the left flank of the Americans, advancing towards Vire. The German army fought hard, over every foot of ground, to frustrate and delay the Allies. The Suffolks were up against elements of a battle-hardened and fanatical SS Panzer Division. Advancing down the Fleur Road, they reached the Tinchebray crossroads, near the hamlet of Coquard.
Today's a special day. Today is June the 6th, and we're here because it's the 75th anniversary of the Normandy landings, Operation Overlord, which was the Allied invasion of Europe to liberate Europe. If we move forward from the lodgement of the armies on the coast, eventually they move down further south, and we're in a particular place called Coquard, which is on the D512, which is a road that runs between Estrie and Sourdeval, which is about 30 kilometers southwest of Caen. And after several weeks of fighting, intense fighting, there was fighting all over Normandy, through the hedgerows, against stiff opposition. Caen took nearly 5 weeks to fall. There were armies from Canada, from England. The Americans were here. Amongst them was the 1st Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment. Where I'm standing is on a crossroads, Coquard. As I've said, this was a scene of a particularly bloody battle between the 1st Battalion of the Suffolks and Germans. Behind me, if we look up this way, there was a battalion HQ about 2 kilometers away, and here to my right, over here, was the crossroads. This was deemed an important supply line because it ran north to south. The Germans wanted to use this line to keep it open to bring supplies up, and the British and the Suffolks were tasked to try to take this crossroads, which they did in an action that caught the Germans by surprise. A Company and B Company moved in here, took the crossroads, took up positions, and had captured this land. Partway through the action, they heard the rumbling of a truck, and a German truck came up from the south through the crossroads. The Suffolks were hidden and were quiet and ambushed the vehicle, killing everybody in it, and including 2 Germans that tried to run away. They then discovered that they were actually in open land, and if you look round behind my shoulder, up this way, you will see the slope runs right up to a line of trees. And actually this slope is quite pronounced, and along the top of the wood, the Germans were dug in with machine guns in emplacements up there with a perfect view of this particular crossroads, which they had previously held. And so they knew exactly the coordinates of the crossroads. So they were able to strafe the crossroads, fire at the crossroads with mortar, with great accuracy. And in the course of this battle, nearly all the officers in the Suffolk Regiment were killed. The commanding officer was killed, the sergeant major, the NCOs. They were in a terrible state. There are people going back to the battle HQ and to the medic tent in bits. Eventually supplies were brought forward to relieve the Suffolks, and without any command structure, which had been removed, the Suffolks, really only the men at this stage, were able to move up this track behind me, up into the top of the wood, and eventually take out the German position. But they did so at significant cost. They lost 20 officers and they lost nearly 159 men killed and wounded in this action at Coquard, which remains a significantly bloody battle, but one which has never really been properly reported, is known inside the regiment, but not outside the regiment. And so that's why we're here taking these pictures of this particular battlefield. The action here is significant for another reason. One of the officers of the 1st Battalion Suffolk Regiment was Captain Ken Mayhew. Captain Ken Mayhew was at battalion headquarters and saw what had happened after the crossroads had been taken. Saw the men coming back, one man with his jaw hanging off, and could see how bad it was. They were constantly being shelled in the battalion headquarters, which is about 2 kilometers to the north of the crossroads. When the relieving forces came, Ken Mayhew was amongst those soldiers and continued to mop up and carry on and got through the war, survived the war. And it's extraordinary because Ken Mayhew is here with us today. He's 102 years old. He's probably the oldest veteran in Normandy for the 75th anniversary and commemorations, and we'll be meeting him a little later on. But he significantly was here yesterday and remembered this action and this particular crossroads at Coquard.
I was back up that road.
But when you got down here, I mean, it must have been pretty grisly, I suppose, with a number of casualties and what had happened.
It was grisly where I was.
Oh, you came from grisly to more grisly.
Being grisly, I was at the battalion headquarters, and my great friend Hugh Merriam was the adjutant at that time. We were chatting there, and every now and again we came up on artillery fire. And then I was wounded, started walking back to the RAP, which was right next to where we were.
Oh, so you saw them all coming in bits.
I saw friends come in, my ex number 2 in my carrier platoon, a lieutenant, then Harry Elliott, who was commanding over the anti-tank platoon, to get back. His jaw absolutely shattered.
At the end of the battle at Tinchebray crossroads, Ken Mayhew was told to form a fighting reconnaissance group using vehicles from his carrier platoons and mortars. It was nicknamed Ken Force. Their task was to lead the advance and locate the enemy. They advanced rapidly, some 24 hours later, entering Fleur to liberate the town. At 1 p.m. on the 11th of August 1944, Ken Mayhew was greeted by the mayor. 75 years later, in 2019, Ken returned to Fleur to be greeted on the same spot by the current mayor. Everyone then moved to the Hotel de Ville, where the mayor presented Ken Mayhew with the Freedom of Fleur. He told Ken the award was on behalf of a grateful town to the British for liberating them from German occupation in 1944. They would never forget. The address in response is being given by Brigadier Tony Calder, whose father, Major Johnny Calder, was wounded at Coquard.
Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, I apologise for not speaking to you in French. I have tried it before and it hasn't worked. Nobody understood me. So I'm afraid we're going to have to do this through translation. My name is Tony Calder and I'm the president of the Old Comrades Association of the Suffolk Regiment, of which Ken is obviously one of our members. And on Ken's behalf, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and the people of Ireland for the great honour that you do him. And I'm sure that he is feeling a little bit prouder now that he is a citizen of Ireland. I'd just like to say a few words about what the men of the Suffolk Regiment did just before they arrived at Fleur. This morning we were at the crossroads north of Tinchebray, where a battle took part, which included my father, who was a company second in command at the time. It was one of the toughest battles that the Suffolk Regiment had fought in Normandy. The casualties were horrendous. Out of a battalion of under 700, 150 were either killed or wounded. And one company, which was attacking the hill just above the crossroads, every single sergeant and every single officer during that attack was either killed or wounded. And yet they managed to take their objectives with just the young soldiers who had landed only a few weeks before on the beaches at D-Day. I would like to pay tribute to their courage and to their sacrifice in helping to liberate this part of France. Once again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the honour that you do Ken.
The 75th anniversary of D-Day was almost the last time any surviving veterans of the Suffolk Regiment were able to return to Normandy to take part in the commemoration service. Major battles and individual actions were remembered as local French came together with the veterans and English visitors to pay tribute to the courage and determination of those who had taken part in the largest seaborne landing in history. All those present gave thanks and remembered the many unsung heroes who had fought here to overthrow the tyranny of Nazi occupation, in particular those who had given their lives in the cause of freedom. Two veterans meet again, Major Ken Mayhew and Private Ken Wright, proud of what they had achieved, but at great cost. They were both here with the 1st Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment in June 1944. It's the first time that they have met since then.
Contre nous la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé, l'étendard sanglant élevé. Entendez-vous dans nos campagnes mugir ces féroces soldats qui viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger nos fils et nos compagnes. Aux